let's put the world travel aside for a moment. And I think we share similar aspects of our lives. You were raised by very strong women.
Very strong women, yes.
And who had the ability to keep going against all odds.
Well, yes, I mean, I think I've spoken about it often, and it will be in my autobiography, but my father, who was actually my stepfather, was pretty much a rotten drunk. And there was, I won't go into great detail on it, but we hit the road running. When I was about 10, about that age, my brother had died in an accident in Canberra, and we spent three and a half years in the bush, avoiding private investigators and basically surviving on boiling up roots from the garden. I mean, but what kept us going was my mother, who, remember, had lost a child, but my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, and other, they would go through, and basically all the way through the rest of my life. And so for the first 20 years, my mother raised me. Then I got married to, Dee Laurel, and then I was married to her for 36 years. And then, so this is now the only part in my life. Well, now I have a girlfriend, Julia, who's a very strong woman. She's the editor of Money magazine, and etc. But so basically, yes, I don't mind giving myself, falling into the arms of women and saying, "You tell me what to do," or because I've made a lot of decisions in my life. But basically, when it comes to personal and private decisions and all that, it's often better to go with women who. I'm one of those people who believe that women are absolutely the smarter of the species. They're truly the smarter. We don't count really, and so
I can see a lot of heads watching this video going, yes.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's funny. We're talking about at the moment in Parliament and giving women an equal choice, and I'm saying it's a no-brainer. Yes, we should give women. Women bring so much value to what we're doing, sort of like. But like I said, yeah, we do have that in common. We have had women that have.
And your mum became a very good friend for a long time for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she died when she was close on 90, and I think that she actually, from her I can take my ability, literature, reading, writing, words, I think that came from her. Wow. I came from, sort of like, she taught me to appreciate, sort of like, and we would have conversations in her later years. I mean, she was the sharpest knife in the drawer. In the retirement village where she lived, all the people who went there, they would all say, "Oh, your mother, she's the one we come and speak to. The rest of them we can't, but we can come and speak to your mother," And so, yes, and I was always quite proud of that.
She was feisty.
Yeah, and as was my Aunt Gloria, her sister. I mean, I can remember when Aunt Gloria came out, they got a house together, pulled in to get a house together in Blacktown. And basically we were all her 4 children, and ours. We were all basically, excuse me, cousin Robert, who lives nearby. We speak often about that, and it's it was really an important.
So from Sydney's, well, you travelled around the state.
I went to 12 schools in 10 years.
12 schools in 10 years.
Yeah, and basically, well, you know what? I say 10 years, but if the truth be known, it was only 9 because I never went to 5th class. I never went to fifth class. I was just hiding out in the bush, and basically, but when they enrolled me in school, it was in the the second term at Parks Public School, we didn't tell them that I hadn't gone to 5th class, but they didn't know anything about me. So they put me in 6C. At the end of that year, I became the dux of the school. I topped every kid in 6th class at all. And they used to call me the professor. I'm not boasting, but I could just remember stuff, you know. I just had this capacity, this thing. It's why I won Rock Brain of the Universe. You know? I could remember things. And so, yes, that's basically what happened. So, yeah,
So
12 schools in about 9 years, not 10.
And so you end up in Blacktown, which is roughly, without traffic, about 40 minutes west of Sydney. And from there, you go around the world. How many times?
Yeah, I don't know.
You've been to Antarctica.
Antarctica twice, the high Arctic 4 times. And I mean, yet, funnily enough, the first international place I went was in 1973 when my honeymoon, and we went to Fiji. Laurel and I went to Fiji. That was my first honeymoon. But then once I got a taste for it, once I realised that this is something I'd like to do, so basically, you know, you couldn't stop me. This is going to amaze a lot of people. I was a public servant for 8 years. I worked for I was a junior postal officer when I was 15, and at the GPO in Sydney, and then I worked for the Department of the Media, and I was writing research into children's TV standards, and I wrote the report that recommended the establishment of a government-funded youth radio station. But of course, my name was taken off, and my section head's name was put on, and so and I don't think anybody at Triple J has ever sort of is prepared to acknowledge that I had anything to do with it. But never mind, I know. And it was really good. But basically, it was when I was at the Department of the Media that the old 55 idea came to me. Happy Days was on the small screen. American Graffiti was on the big screen. Remember, rock and roll was then only 10 years past. You know, sort of like it was still. And I went, hang on, I've got an idea. And there was a guy on the floor below me. He had a quiff of black hair. His name was Jeff Plummer, and he says, I've got a band. He said, and we're in Cronulla, which might have been the far side of the moon as far as I was concerned. And you know, we play old rock and roll. You should come down and see us. You know, you're into music. So I went down and saw them, and I took them aside. There's only 4 of them then. There was no Frankie, and there was no Wilbur. And I said, yeah. They were called Thanos for reasons you can read my autobiography. And I said, I got an idea. How about I manage you, and we get you. I'll give you a name, and I'll pick some clothes, and I'll research some songs for you. And well, okay. And Jim Manzi, the songwriter, was more into Deep Purple at the time, you know. And so then, okay, fine, yeah, we'll do that. So anyway, and then Michael Gudinski, the recently departed Michael Gudinski, had a label called Mushroom Records. They'd done big business with Skyhooks, big business. And they needed another act like Skyhooks. And so basically, through his partner, Ray Evans, I got him signed. And we did an album called Take It Greasy, which was the first real album by Charles Fisher, the producer Charles Fisher, who would, not that many years later, sell 12 million copies of the first Savage Garden album. So he was really a producer on the rise. And suddenly we had this #1 triple platinum debut album, which knocks ABBA off #1 on the charts. And it's an extraordinary sort of like scenario. Now, it only really lasted for me about 18 months. It was over and done with fairly quickly, but it was so huge. I remember we would arrive in a country town, and they would lay on 7 Ford Custom Lines or Oldsmobiles or Buicks, 7 because there was one for the manager, put us all in each one and take us down the main street, and they'll be closed for the day, and people will be yelling and screaming away. I don't think Sherbet or Skyhawks ever actually had that. You know, we reached a level of people that I don't think they ever did. And so, look, after that, of course, as the man who created Old 55, and of course I co-wrote 3 of their hits. You mentioned I Want a Rockin' Christmas, and that got to number one in Melbourne for 6 or 7 weeks. Unbelievable.
I read the only way it was kicked out of the charts was because it was the end of January.
Exactly. Stan Rope, the great Stan Rope, rang me and said, "We've never done this before, Glenn." He said, "But we're about to drop our number 1 record from the playlist." I said, "Why would you do that, Stan?" He said, "Why do you think it's the end of January?" So anyways, so after that I could be, well, the story goes on, and I could compile albums, and I could do whatever I wanted to do in a way.
I was fascinated to learn that you loved Danny Kaye.
Yeah, I did love that. It was the first thing I ever wrote that was published was a letter that in TV Week. That was probably the first thing. I would watch Mary Andrew, and I would watch Hans Christian Andersen, and I would watch, sort of like whatever on television, and I loved it. The pestle and the poison, and the poison and the pestle. And I loved Danny Kaye, and I thought he was so very, very clever. But then again, I've come to know, spending time with Julia, that it's basically Jewish people that have figured so very prominently in my life before I even realised it. Groucho Marx and the Marx brothers, and then it would be Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Carole King, Neil Diamond, sort of, et cetera, and because Julia, her mother is Jewish. She comes from an Iraqi background. All members of her family, and they're funny and they're witty, and so is Seinfeld and Billy Crystal. In other words, going back to George Gershwin. In other words, so many people are Jewish. So maybe Danny Kaye's Jewishness, maybe there was something in there before I even knew what being a Jewish person was. Maybe that appealed to me. Maybe I understood that.
Well, he had a show, a variety show in America in the 60s, and my father was part of the Maori contingent that went to open the Polynesian Cultural Centre in Hawaii, and went to the mainland and was on his show.
Wow!
And and that footage came to light and is now on YouTube.
Lovely, mate.
Some 50 years after the event. And
look, I kind of like the insanity of it. He could be a scattered, but a clever, like in control of everything around him. But like I said, whether it's like the Marx Brothers or Danny Kaye, whatever, there was always something about it that really got my attention. But I think the first 2 things I got published, one was a letter in TV Times, TV Week, whatever, about Danny Kaye, and then I wrote a letter to Go Set about John and Yoko, and that got published as well. So that's how I started my writing career.
I've heard singers and performers say when they turn on the radio and hear their voice, it must be similar to open a magazine or a book and see your name there.
It cannot be denied. We all love to see our byline in print, no matter how many hundreds and or thousands of times it's happened. When you see your byline, you go, okay, it fills you with just a little bit of pride, By the way, I mentioned, by the way, that I ended up Old 55. Before Old 55, I did a run as a concert promoter, and I did concerts at Paddington Town Hall with the La-Di-Dahs and the Nutwood Rug Band, and sort of like, and Captain Matchbox Whoopee Band and things like that. But in 1974, I put on a one-day rock festival at Blacktown Showgrounds called Star Rock 74. And Star Rock 74, it lost a huge amount of money. Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs headlined it.
Wow.
Stevie Wright was going to be on it, but he had around the time his third album collapsed, and his heroin addiction caused him great problem. And basically, so I got offered a band that was coming to Melbourne, out of Melbourne. It was going to be their first ever Sydney appearance. I'd like to think I got for about $100 with Skyhawks.
Wow.
So I got Skyhawks on their first ever Sydney appearance at Blacktown Showgrounds. But like I said, it was a nice idea, but it lost a lot of money. But then I went on to have children and create Old 55 and do all sorts of things.
You've had 6 children?
I've had 6 children, six children, and I've got 13 grandchildren. And my 6 children are all accomplished people, and they're all, they do things that in many cases I can't do. And they have interests and pursuits that I don't have. And I don't know that there's any of them were writers like I was. But then again, maybe that's the thing. You always want to be something different to what your old man is or was or does or whatever, So it's, but yeah.
One of the things I liked learning about you over time is I've never known you to hold a grudge.
I can't do it. I've never been able to. Yeah, it's not really. Even people who have been, look, like everyone in life, I've had people who've been cruel to me. I've had people who have actually not treated me that well. But I can't carry it with me. I can't think about it. I like to think I've raised my kids in the same way, because if you have resentment and you have grudges, then they get you twice. They get you the time they've hurt you, and then they get you again because it eats you inside and it gnaws you inside. So it's better to just forget and just move on. So yeah, I don't know whether it's a quality, an admirable trait. I don't know, but I can't do it.
I also like that you enjoy working for everything you've got. You worked hard for it.
Yes, I've never been able to work out people who actually want to line up at, and this could turn off heart a number of the people watching, but line up at newsagents and buy lotto tickets. And I feel like I just want to look at them and say, work for what? Don't wait for your ship to come in. Stop waiting for your ship to come in. Float your own ship, And look, that could be terribly arrogant of me. And I'm quite prepared to admit that it possibly is arrogant of me to think like that. But I could never, in the early days, with Old 55, they would play some of the bigger clubs. And I would have to walk across the room, past the one-armed bandits, with people actually just putting endless amounts of money in, and I would just, with their glazed look on their face, and I would think, no, I can't do that, and I can't imagine it, and I can't see why they would do that. But even oddly enough, when I lecture on cruise ships, and if the theatre means I have to walk through the casino, I'd rather go to the floor up or the floor down and walk up or down, yes, down the stairs to go and give my lecture, rather than walk through all the casinos. It's of no interest to me. Just no. Like I said, I'd rather earn, and I'm not a rich man. I'm not a rich man. I possibly should be richer than I am, but like I said, that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it.
Excellent. One of the great thrills of my life was going to the Washington Memorial, where Dr. Martin Luther King stood, and in his wonderful speech said, "I have a dream," where one day my 4 little children will be judged by the colour of the content of their character,
rather than the colour of their skin.
And one of the things that I thought of in that moment was, you've always judged people by the content of their character.
Absolutely. In fact, I cannot even begin to understand prejudice and bigotry. I just cannot understand it. And yes, it infuriates me, but more than it infuriates me, it puzzles me. Why anybody would think that someone is lesser than they are because, again, the colour of their skin, or because their nationality, or because their socio-economic background. I really do think that makes no sense at all. And it's again, I don't think my children have ever heard their father say anything prejudicial about anybody, and in turn, I don't think I've ever heard them say it, because I don't think they've heard it, and it's not been, because I don't think that if somebody has said, "You're not born a racist. You are turned into one. You turn into one because of the things you hear and because of the things that are said around you." Well, my children didn't have them said around them. It's like it was as simple as that. And hopefully with my 13 grandchildren, they'll be the same way. They won't think that as well.
It's a wonderful thing to have, to recognise that all of us have something to contribute.
Always.
And it truly is wonderful to have that affirmed. Is there anything in your life that you haven't done that you want to?
Until this shutdown happened and we couldn't get on planes, I wanted to go to Uzbekistan, Rwanda, Madagascar. There are countries that I wanted to go. I mean, I've got to Mongolia, and I've got to, but there was, and I've been out falconing, and we had a giant falcon land on my arm and things like that. But no, so there's countries that I want to go to. But I've been to all 7 continents, and it's I don't know. It's hard to say. It's been a pretty, and I'm saying this as if it's over, but a rich and full life so far.
Absolutely. Well, if I could ask a question, almost in summary, if there are people watching this video who were like you, who started out with not a lot of privilege,
no privilege at all, so you can,
and perhaps even not a lot of opportunity, and to look at what you've done, what advice would you give to someone?
Your enthusiasms will take you anywhere. Passion, be passionate, be curious, I would go on television. The reason I was successful on television, and remember I was on the Midday Show for 10 years, and I was on Good Morning Australia for 7 years, and Mornings of Carrie Ann for 5 years. And I don't think it's because I was a good-looking bugger. I don't think it had anything to do. However, wow, when the red light went on, I was there. I was going for it. And people liked that. People enjoyed, and people would speak often about my enthusiasm.
I remember one such occasion, you were a judge on a talent show.
I was judge on Star Search for however, I think I did, however many years, yeah. And the judge on the senior judge on the Rock of Stedford for 12 years. And Star Search, I did 36 episodes of Star Search. But you know what? I did in that too? Elements of my character would come out. Now it's become a bit commonplace for someone to say, they're the nice judge, or they're the mean judge. I was always a nice judge. In other words, people had worked very hard to appear in the... Was I going to pull the rug out from underneath them? No. I would always say positive things. I would always build them up. And even when, to be perfectly honest, maybe they weren't all that impressive, it didn't matter, sort of like, and it worked. The Rock of Stedford particularly, I can remember to this day meeting, it's usually women who come up to me, and they're of a certain middle age now, And they said, "You judged me in the Rock of Stedford," she said. She said, and I could remember every word you said. And I walked around for days repeating lines to myself because you'd said something really positive about me. She said, "You were just one." And you know what? That rather than have somebody say, "You were an arsehole," yeah, you didn't get me, you didn't understand me, and basically, so that's.
I remember one contestant, a young lady, you said to her in the judging, "Your vocals are like the gearbox of a Porsche." And everybody was going, wow.
Yeah, I used to have to try and think of, when I was judging lines, that, I mean, being a writer helped. Being a writer helped. They really, really did, sort of like there were moments that, but look, I was so glad to be able to do that.
So just have enthusiasm, just keep going and keep trying. That's the advice you'd give.
I'd say so. And it's, look, the funny thing is, I used to write for university magazines, Honi Soit and Tharunka. Now, I left school at 15. I never went near university. However, I would go and I would deliver my copy. They thought I was a student. They just presumed, and I would do record reviews and everything. But this was pre-old 55, and now I've lectured at universities. And what I love is I love people who come up to me and they say, a bit of sycophancy. They go, "Oh, I love your style. Your writing style. Let me guess. It's Sydney University." "Oh, don't tell me. University of New South Wales." And I just grin and I go, "Yeah, okay." Well, I don't have the heart to tell them, but no, I left school at 15.
And you are the epitome to all Australians. That ethos, which seems to be fading somewhat, is anyone can have a go.
Yeah.
Anyone can get up and make something happen.
Well, there was a lot of, they're perhaps all my age or a little bit older than me, but guys who left school at 15, 14 or 15, Philip Adams, Paul Keating, Alan Bond, for all his faults. I mean, there were a lot of people who made things in life simply and left school at quite an early stage. By the way, there was something about, I sometimes get up and I give lectures. I've done them in schools, in high schools, and 70% of them are just, whatever. Yeah, we're going to get up and play. But maybe 20% are paying attention. I quote from a story I did with Paul Keating. Paul Keating went on to become the Prime Minister. I'm telling you anything. He managed a band. He wanted to be Brian Epstein at one point. He managed a band, and they were at a pub at Ashfield, the Boulevard Hotel, and they were called the Ramrods. And I wanted to do a story with him, and he, no. He didn't ever want to talk about it. But then one day, he's on a plane when he was federal treasurer, going from Sydney to Melbourne, and he's with a girl called Helen Wheels, who used to be Dennis Hanlon's secretary at Sony Music. He was reading a story about James Taylor, and obviously really, really enjoying it. And Helen just sort of leaned over and said, "Oh, Mr. Keating, that story was written by a good friend of mine who actually wants to sit down and talk with you." "Okay," he said, "bring him in my office. I'll give him half an hour." That half an hour, when I went to his office that day, went for 90 minutes.
Wow.
It was cancel all my calls. It was. And he had an impression of being a funereal character. Nothing like that at all. I remember coming home and saying to Laurel, he was the least funereal person I've ever met. I mean, veins would pulse out at his temple, clutching white knuckles as he would clutch the side of his chair. But anyway, the point I'm getting at, he gave a story. He said that the Ramrods would have the Bee Gees support them. And he said, and the Bee Gees, he said, were, a bunch of little kids. He said, you know, he's very kidding away. But we were playing rhythm and blues, and we were playing really, really tough stuff. And I said, yes, Paul, but to play the devil's advocate here, they went on to sell, you know, hundreds of millions of records, and the Ramrods sold about 3 or 4. And he said, yes, he said. But he said what happened was, he said, all the Ramrod's girlfriends, he said, they got used to being able to get a free meal, and they got used to being able to boast, you know, around the area that, you know, their boyfriend played. He said, but the Bee Gees, they never let the hunger go. They never let the hunger go. He said, so the way you make it, he said, anything in life. And here's an example of it. You never let the hunger abate. So to you, to all the cameras here, yeah, that's actually, as I say in all my lessons, in all the lectures I give, how do you achieve whatever it is you want to achieve? You do not want the comforts of the halfway hotel. You want a bigger picture.
The full experience.
You want the full experience. Well, I was having dinner at the recital hall, a restaurant beside it.
Yes.
And I said to the people with me, can you just excuse me a minute? I just want to. When I walked up to Martin Place, where the cenotaph is, outside the GPO, and then it was 50 years since I'd started work. It was the 50th anniversary. And I looked up at this GPO, and I was the only person there, and I said to myself, wow, what has happened in the 50 years since I walked through your door? So I walked into that building, and I used to wheel a cane trolley full of franked money orders, you know, in the GPO. But I said, I could never have thought of what would happen, or where I would go, or what I would do. And so that was, and then I went back, and I didn't really say anything. I sat down at and they said, where have you been? Oh yeah, I just had to go.
Lovely. Well, I wanted to say something in closing. There's a lot of aspects to all of us. But to you, when I was 14 and my father passed away, you gave me a phone call, and you came over in a white station wagon, a Mazda if I recall, and you drove me around 2 blocks. You never said much except this: I liked your dad, he was a good man.
Yeah.
If there's anything you ever want, you come and ask.
Thus we're doing this. And I'm delighted to be doing this for you.
And let me say to you, I don't think I ever called on that often, but the feeling of knowing that someone cared, being surrounded by people who said, yeah, we've got to look after, you know, widows and fatherless, and not seeing any action. But your little thing meant the world to me. And that's a side that very few people would know about you. And I will never forget it. And when we were parting, you gave me 2 tickets to a movie, I think, which was Grease 2 premiere. And you said, you've got a girlfriend, right? And I said, yes. You said, don't get her in the sack. and that was it. But those 4-5 minutes have lived with me for my lifetime.
Well, it is said that you often don't realise until the end of your life what impact some of the things that you've done or said have had. And, you know, obviously that was one of them. But you've been a good friend too.
Thank you.
And I've been delighted. 1, 2, 3, 4 cameras. Hello, all cameras. I've been delighted to do this, and I hope you chop it up into something worthwhile.
Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, mate.